The morning fog hung thick over Port Harbor as the crew of the Oceanic Explorer loaded the last of their supplies. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries piercing the steady rhythm of waves slapping against the dock. Captain Elena Reyes stood at the helm, her weathered hands gripping the railing as she watched her team work. At 48, she had spent more time at sea than on land, and the slight rocking of a ship felt more like home than any apartment ever could. "Weather report just came in," said First Mate Michael Torres, climbing the steps to join her. "Looks clear for the first week, then some storms brewing north of our route." Elena nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon where the fog was slowly burning away under the rising sun. "We'll adjust course if needed. Is everyone aboard?" "Just waiting on the science team. Their equipment took longer to calibrate than expected." The Oceanic Explorer wasn't the largest research vessel in the fleet, but what it lacked in size it made up for in advanced technology. Funded by the International Oceanic Research Foundation, the ship had been specially outfitted for this expedition, a 3-month journey to study little-known marine ecosystems in the North Atlantic. As if on cue, a small group of people in Navy windbreakers appeared on the dock. At the front walked Dr. Thomas Wu, the lead scientist for the expedition. His thin frame and careful movements made him look more like a librarian than someone who had spent 15 years studying the mysteries of the deep ocean. "Sorry for the delay, Captain," he called up. "The new sonar array needed extra attention." Elena waved in acknowledgement. The crew helped the scientists aboard, hauling expensive-looking equipment cases in personal bags. Within the hour, lines were cast off, and the Oceanic Explorer pulled away from Port Harbor, the morning sun now fully visible as they headed for open water. The first few days passed without incident. The crew settled into their routines: 4-hour watches, maintenance checks, meals in the cramped galley where Cook Pete somehow managed to make decent food in a space smaller than most people's bathrooms. The science team spent most of their time setting up their equipment in the lab, emerging only for meals or to stand at the rails, staring out at the endless blue that surrounded them. On the 5th day, they hit their first patch of rough weather. Nothing serious, just enough to send a few of the newer crew members reaching for motion sickness patches. By day 7, they had left the common shipping lanes behind, venturing into less traveled waters. "Not many come out this way," Elena mentioned to Dr. Wu one evening as they both stood on the bridge, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. "Too far from common routes, not much to see by normal standards." "That's exactly why we're here," Wu replied, a slight smile breaking through his usually serious expression. "The unknown is where discovery happens." By the end of the 2nd week, they had established a comfortable rhythm. The days blended together, marked only by the changing weather and the scientists' growing excitement as they approached their first research site. Elena had captained many expeditions, but there was something about this one that felt different. She couldn't put her finger on what it was. Just a feeling, a slight unease that settled in her stomach when she woke each morning. The ship's communications specialist, Raj Patel, knocked on her cabin door late one night during the 3rd week. "At sea. Sorry to disturb you, Captain, but I thought you should know. We're getting some strange interference on our comms." Elena followed him to the communications room, where he showed her the readings. Nothing alarming, just unusual static patterns that didn't match typical atmospheric interference. "Could be solar flares," she suggested, though something in Raj's expression told her he didn't think so. "Maybe," he conceded. "But it started exactly 43 minutes ago, and it's not affecting all frequencies, just a very specific band. And look at this pattern, it's too regular." Elena studied the screen, the hairs on her arms rising slightly. The interference pattern did look unusually rhythmic, almost like, "Are you saying someone's trying to contact us?" she asked quietly. Raj shook his head. "No, not exactly. It's not a signal being sent to us. It's more like something interfering with the signals passing through a certain area, like something big is out there disrupting the waves." Elena made a note in the ship's log but decided not to wake the others. If it continued by morning, she'd bring it up at the daily briefing. The next day brought more oddities. The ship's Navigator Grace Chen reported that the compass had been showing slight variations, nothing dramatic but enough that she had noticed. "It's like we're passing through some kind of magnetic field," she explained, pointing to her charts where she had marked the discrepancies. "See here?" The needle shifted 2 degrees west, then back to normal an hour later. That afternoon, the ocean grew unusually still. Not calm, the sea was never truly calm, but different. The waves seemed to flatten out, creating an almost glass-like surface that reflected the clouds above in perfect detail. Several crew members commented on it, with one young sailor remarking that it felt like they were sailing on a mirror. In the lab, the scientists noticed it too. Their instruments showed a sudden drop in surface current activity, something that didn't align with any weather patterns or known oceanic phenomena in the area. "Could be underwater seismic activity affecting the currents," suggested Liu, one of the marine biologists, but he didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the ship, feeling that something wasn't right. After tossing for hours, she gave up and made her way to the bridge, nodding to the night watch officer as she stepped outside, onto the deck. The night was clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The moon hung low, creating a silver pathway across the water. Elena breathed in the salt air, trying to calm her nerves when she noticed something strange in the water. About 50 yards off the starboard side, a faint glow, blue-green and pulsing slowly, just beneath the surface. She grabbed a pair of binoculars from the bridge and focused on the spot. The glow seemed to be moving following their course. At first she thought it might be bioluminescent plankton disturbed by their wake, but this light was too focused, too regular in its pulsing. "Officer Reynolds," she called back to the bridge. "Are you seeing this?" The young officer joined her at the railing, squinting in the direction she pointed. "What is that?" he whispered, taking the binoculars from her. "Wake the science team," Elena ordered, "and get our underwater cameras ready." By the time Dr. Wu and 2 other scientists arrived on deck, the glow had grown stronger and had been joined by several other similar lights, all pulsing in the same rhythm, all tracking alongside the ship. "I've never seen anything like it," Ku said, his voice hushed with a mixture of awe and concern. "It's not behaving like any bioluminescent organism I know." They deployed a remote camera, sending it down into the water near the lights. On the monitor in the lab, they watched as the camera descended. The water was unusually clear, visibility extending further than it should have at that depth and time of night. The light seemed to retreat from the camera, staying just at the edge of visibility. When the camera reached 100 meters, something large moved across the screen, too quick to identify, just a dark shape against the blue-black water. "Did you see that?" gasped one of the junior scientists. Wu nodded, his face pale in the glow of the monitor. "Rewind and slow it down." They reviewed the footage frame by frame, but whatever had passed by the camera had moved too quickly to capture clearly. All they could see was a vague impression of something massive, something that shouldn't have been able to move that fast. As dawn approached, the lights beneath the surface gradually faded, and the sea returned to its normal state. The crew gathered in the mess hall, cups of coffee clutched in tired hands as they discussed what they had seen. "Could be a new species," suggested Wu. "Or maybe a known one exhibiting unusual behavior." Elena listened to the theories, but a feeling of unease had settled deep in her stomach. In 20 years at sea, she had witnessed strange things. Lights in the sky that couldn't be explained, sudden squalls that appeared from nowhere, even what some might call ghost ships in the distance. But this felt different. This felt intentional. Later that day, the ship's instruments began registering unusual readings, subtle disturbances in water temperature, electromagnetic fluctuations that made the more sensitive equipment go haywire. "We should turn back," said Torres, her first mate, when they were alone on the bridge. "Something's not right out here." Elena looked at him, then out at the horizon. They were now 3 weeks into their journey, in waters rarely traversed by other vessels. The nearest port was 4 days away at best speed. "We're scientists and sailors," she said finally. We came here to discover the unknown, and that's exactly what we're going to do." But as she gave the order to continue on their planned course, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them out there in the depths had been waiting a very long time. And perhaps it had been watching them all along. The blue glow beneath the waves became a nightly occurrence. Each evening as darkness fell, the lights would appear, sometimes just a few, other times dozens, always keeping pace with the ship like silent escorts. The crew grew accustomed to their presence, though few would admit to feeling comfortable with them. "They're watching us," whispered Cook Pete one night as a group gathered on the deck, staring down at the pulsing lights. "Whatever they are, they're studying us just as much as we're studying them." Dr. Wu and his team worked around the clock, analyzing the data they collected. Water samples taken near the lights showed normal composition, though with slightly elevated electrical conductivity. Temperature readings fluctuated in patterns that defied natural explanation. Most puzzling were the sonar readings. Instead of bouncing back clearly, the signals returned distorted, as if something was absorbing or redirecting them. On the morning of the 4th day after the lights first appeared, Elena called a meeting in the ship's conference room. "I need honest opinions," she said, looking around at the tired faces of her senior crew and the science team. "Do we continue as planned, or do we change course?" First, Mate Torres was the first to speak. "These phenomena are interesting, but they don't seem dangerous. I say we stick to the mission." Dr. Wu nodded in agreement. "This could be the discovery of a lifetime. We need more data before we even begin to understand what we're seeing." Others weren't so sure. The ship's engineer, a stocky man named Lee who had been at sea longer than anyone except Elena, cleared his throat. "I've seen St. Elmo's fire. I've seen weather balls and methane flares and every kind of natural light show the ocean can produce," he said slowly. "This isn't any of those things, and my engines are working too hard for the speed we're moving. Something's dragging at us." The debate continued until Elena finally raised her hand for silence. "We'll continue for now, but we'll reassess in 48 hours. I want hourly reports from all departments. Anything unusual, no matter how small, gets logged and reported immediately." That night, the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. One minute the sky was clear, stars visible from horizon to horizon, and the next, dark clouds rolled in like smoke, blotting out the light. The wind picked up so suddenly that loose equipment on deck went flying before anyone could secure it. "All hands," Elena shouted into the ship's comm system as she raced to the bridge. "Secure all stations and prepare for heavy weather." The crew scrambled to their posts as the first massive waves hit the ship. The Oceanic Explorer was built to withstand rough seas, but this was something else entirely. Waves towered over the vessel, crashing down with enough force to make the entire ship shudder. Rain lashed the windows of the bridge so hard that visibility dropped to near zero. "This isn't natural," Torres yelled over the howling wind as he gripped the console to stay upright. "It came too fast, and look, it's only around us." He pointed to the radar screen, which showed the storm system as a perfect circle with their ship at the center. For 6 terrifying hours, the Oceanic Explorer fought against the storm. Equipment broke loose, crashing through the lab and destroying months of research. 2 crew members suffered injuries. One a broken arm, another a deep gash that the ship's medic struggled to close in the pitching vessel. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the storm stopped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment they were in the heart of a raging tempest, and the next they were floating on calm seas under a perfectly clear night sky. The silence that followed was almost more unnerving than the storm's fury. "Damage report," Elena ordered, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet bridge. As the reports came in from around the ship, the crew gathered on deck, drawn by something none of them could explain. A feeling, a pull toward the starboard side. What they saw there would be burned into their memories forever. The sea was glowing, not with the small blue lights they had grown used to, but with something much larger, something massive. The water seemed to be lit from below by a light source, the size of a football field, a soft greenish-white radiance that illuminated the underside of the low clouds that still lingered after the storm. My God, breathed Dr. Wu, his scientific detachment crumbling in the face of what they were witnessing. It's enormous. As they watched, transfixed, the light began to move, not toward them or away, but upward, as if whatever was creating, it was rising from the depths. That's when they saw it, or rather that's when they saw the first hint of it, a massive dark shape breaking the surface about half a mile away. From the bridge, Deck Officer Anderson was the first to spot it through his binoculars. "Contact off the starboard bow," he shouted, his voice cracking. Something surfacing." Elena grabbed her own binoculars and trained them on the spot Anderson indicated. At first, all she could see was a disturbance in the water, like a submarine might make when coming up for air. But this was much larger than any submarine she had ever seen or heard of. The water bulged upward, forming a dome that rose higher and higher. Then it broke the surface. Later, when they tried to describe what they had seen, the crew would struggle to find the words. It wasn't a sea creature, at least not like any known to science. It wasn't a submarine or any other man-made vessel. The closest Elena could come to describing it was a mountain made of strange metal, but moving like it was alive. The object, for lack of a better term, rose just high enough to reveal what seemed to be its top portion before sinking back beneath the waves. It was dark, with a surface that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, except for patterns of luminescence that ran across it in complex shifting designs. Its shape was vaguely oval but with protrusions and recesses that made no sense from an engineering or biological perspective, and it was watching them. None of them could explain how they knew this, but every person on that deck felt it. A presence and awareness, a vast intelligence turning its attention toward their tiny vessel. For a brief moment, it was visible, and then it sank beneath the surface again, leaving only the glow, now pulsing with a new intensity. "Did anyone get pictures?" Dr. Wu asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The ship's photographer, a quiet woman named Vega, nodded numbly. "Video too, if the camera worked. Everything electronic went haywire when that thing surfaced." They retreated to the lab to check the footage, leaving only the required crew on deck. The ship felt different now, the familiar creaks and groans taking on a menacing quality in the quiet that followed their sighting. The footage, when they reviewed it, was disappointing. Static filled most of the frames with only brief glimpses of something large breaking the surface. The still photos were better but blurry, as if the camera's autofocus couldn't quite lock on to what it was seeing. "It's like it doesn't want to be recorded," muttered Raj, who had joined them in the lab. "The same thing happened with our communications during the sighting. Total blackout. That night no one slept well." The lights beneath the surface continued their silent patrol around the ship, but now they seemed less like curious escorts and more like guards. Or perhaps a cage. In her cabin, Elena pored over maps and charts, looking for the nearest port, the nearest other vessel, anything that might provide some sense of normalcy or assistance. But they were alone out here, days from the closest shipping lane in waters that were poorly charted at best. The ship's sonar operator, a young man who had been quiet since the sighting, knocked on her door around 3 a.m. "Captain," he said when she opened it, his face pale in the dim light of the corridor, "you need to see this." He led her to the sonar room where he had been monitoring the waters around them. On the screen was an image that made Elena's blood run cold. Beneath them, directly beneath their ship, was something massive. The sonar couldn't capture its full dimensions, but what it did show was a structure at least 3 times the length of their vessel, moving in perfect sync with them, matching their speed and direction with impossible precision. "It's been there for hours," the operator said. "I thought it was a malfunction at first, but I've run every diagnostic. This is real." Elena stared at the screen, at the enormous shadow lurking beneath them, and for the first time in her career, she felt truly afraid of the sea and what it might contain. "Alert the science team," she said finally, "and plot a new course. We're changing direction at first light. I want to see if it follows us." But as dawn approached and the sky began to lighten, both Elena and the sonar operator knew the answer, before the course change was even implemented. Whatever was down there, it wasn't going to let them go so easily. They were being hunted, or worse, they were being studied. Morning came with a sky so clear and blue it seemed almost artificial. The sea stretched out around them, calm and innocent, as if the previous night's events had been nothing but a shared nightmare. But the tension on board the Oceanic Explorer told a different story. Elena ordered a course change at dawn, turning the ship east toward the nearest shipping lane. For 3 hours they maintained their new heading, the crew watching the sonar with growing unease. The massive shape beneath them adjusted perfectly to every turn, every speed change, staying directly below them like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. "It's toying with us," Torres said quietly as he and Elena studied the navigation charts in her cabin. Whatever it is, it could have done anything it wanted during that storm. Instead, it just watched. Elena nodded, her fingers tracing their position on the map. "We're still 4 days from reaching any significant traffic areas. Even with full power, we can't outrun something that big." "So what do we do?" Torres asked. Elena straightened up, decision made. "We study it back. That's our mission, isn't it? To learn about the unknown?" Word spread quickly throughout the ship. They would continue east but would also deploy every scientific instrument they had to learn more about their mysterious companion. Dr. Wu and his team, despite their obvious fear, threw themselves into the task with renewed energy. "If we're going to be followed," Wu said as he calibrated a deep-water probe, "we might as well make the most of it scientifically." By mid-morning, they had deployed 3 probes at different depths. The first 2 returned standard readings: water temperature, salinity, current patterns, but the third, which descended to nearly 1,000 meters, went silent as soon as it approached the massive object. "Signal lost," reported the technician monitoring the probe's data stream. "Last transmission showed a sudden temperature increase and then nothing." Dr. Wu frowned at the readings. "That's impossible. The temperature jumped by 30 degrees in less than a second before the probe failed. Nothing natural does that." Around noon, something changed. The sonar operator called the bridge in a panicked voice. "It's moving. Not with us, it's rising." Elena raced to the sonar room, followed by Wu and several others. On the screen, they could see the massive shape ascending slowly from the depths. "All stop," Elena ordered into her radio. "Cut engines." The ship slowed to a halt, now drifting on the gentle current. The entire crew seemed to hold its breath as they waited. "Surface distance?" Elena asked. The sonar operator checked his instruments. "At current ascent rate, it should break the surface in approximately 3 minutes. It's huge, Captain. Bigger than anything I've ever seen." Elena ordered all crew to secure themselves and all loose equipment. Whatever was about to happen, she wanted her ship and people as safe as possible. Those 3 minutes stretched like hours. Some crew members retreated to the safety of the interior cabins, but many, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, made their way to the deck. Elena didn't try to stop them. Whatever they were about to witness, it would be something beyond their understanding. People had a right to see it with their own eyes. The first sign was a gentle vibration that ran through the entire ship, as if the Oceanic Explorer was a tuning fork that had been struck. Then the water around them began to move, not in waves, but in a circular pattern, like an enormous whirlpool forming in slow motion. "It's happening," whispered Vega, the ship's photographer, as she adjusted her camera settings. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely operate the equipment. The center of the whirlpool began to bulge upward, water cascading off an unseen mass that was pushing its way to the surface. There was no sound, except for the rush of water, and the quickened breathing of the crew as they watched in stunned silence. Then it breached, not in a violent explosion of spray as a whale might, but in a controlled, deliberate emergence that seemed to defy the very physics of water displacement. One moment there was only the churning sea, and the next something massive broke through. It rose from the water like a mountain being born, sheets of seawater pouring off its surface. But calling it a mountain didn't begin to capture what they were seeing. The object, and even that word felt inadequate, was a structure of impossible geometry. Its surface was dark and metallic, but not like any metal known to man. It seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it, creating an outline so sharp against the blue sky that it hurt the eyes to look directly at it. As more of it emerged, the crew could see that its shape was constantly changing, sections of the structure folding and unfolding with mathematical precision, reconfiguring itself even as it rose. Yet despite this constant motion, it maintained a perfect symmetry that the human mind struggled to comprehend. "My God," breathed Dr. Wu, his scientific detachment completely abandoned. "It's beautiful." And it was beautiful in the way that lightning is beautiful, awe-inspiring and terrifying all at once. The structure continued to rise until it towered over the oceanic explorer, making their research vessel look like a child's bath toy by comparison. Then it stopped moving, a portion of its mass still beneath the surface, the exposed part easily 10 times the height of the ship's tallest mast. Water continued to stream from its surface, but instead of falling normally, some of it seemed to flow upward, defying gravity in tiny rivulets that traced the shifting patterns on the structure's skin. "Are those symbols?" asked Torres, pointing to markings that were becoming visible as the water cleared. Elena raised her binoculars. Across the surface of the object were intricate patterns that looked like writing or mathematical equations. But as she tried to focus on any single symbol, it seemed to shift and change, as if refusing to be pinned down by human observation. "Someone, get readings," Wu called to his team. But the ship's instruments had all gone dead the moment the object surfaced. Cameras wouldn't fire, measurement devices showed only error messages, and even mechanical compasses spun uselessly in their housings. For what felt like an eternity, the crew of the oceanic explorer stood frozen, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The object hovered half in and half out of the water, neither advancing nor retreating, simply existing, as if it had every right to be there, as if it had always been there, and they were the intruders. Cook Pete was the first to break the silence, his weathered face pale beneath his tan. "It's not a sea monster," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's not even alive, is it?" "I don't know what alive means to something like this," Wu replied. "It moves with purpose. It responds to its environment. It might not be alive in the way we understand life, but it's aware." As if to confirm his words, a section of the structure nearest to the ship began to reconfigure itself, plates of the strange material sliding and rotating to form what looked almost like a lens or an eye, pointed directly at them. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "It's watching us." "No," Wu said, his voice filled with a strange mix of terror and wonder. "It's studying us, just as we've been studying it." The eye-like formation pulsed once, emitting a beam of blue-white light that swept across the deck of the ship. Crew members flinched or ducked, but the light passed over them harmlessly, leaving only a slight tingling sensation on exposed skin. "Scanner, of some kind," muttered the ship's engineer. "Taking our measure." After completing its scan, the structure remained motionless except for the constant, subtle shifting of its components. The crew gradually recovered from their initial shock, some taking photographs with personal devices since the ship's equipment remained non-functional, others making sketches or simply watching in silent awe. Dr. Wu attempted to organize some kind of scientific response, gathering what manual instruments still worked and directing his team to record every observation, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. "This changes everything," he said as he scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Every scientific principle we thought we understood. This thing operates outside our physics." Elena watched the scientist's growing excitement with concern. She understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing, but her responsibility was to her ship and crew, and something that could disable all their electronics with its mere presence was a threat, regardless of whether it had shown hostile intent. "We should try to communicate with it," Wu suggested, turning to Elena with feverish eyes. "Flash patterns with manual lights, perhaps, or sound patterns through the hull." "And say what?" Elena asked. "Hello, we come in peace? This isn't a science fiction movie, Doctor. We have no idea what we're dealing with." Before Wu could respond, the structure began to move again. Not toward them or away, but changing its configuration more dramatically than before. Entire sections rotated and locked into new positions, creating a form that was even more difficult for the human mind to process. "It's reconfiguring," Wu whispered. But why? What triggered this? The answer came from an unexpected source. The ship's medic, a quiet woman who had been watching the proceedings with a thoughtful expression, pointed to the horizon. "Storm's coming," she said simply. They all turned to look. Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering in the distance, moving toward them at an unnatural speed, just like the storm from the previous night. "It's not running from the storm," Elena realized aloud. "It's causing it." As if to confirm her words, electricity began to arc across the surface of the structure, blue-white forks of lightning jumping between its components as its reconfiguration accelerated. The air around them became charged, raising the hair on their arms and necks. "Everyone below," Elena shouted, suddenly certain that they were in grave danger. Now, the crew scrambled for the hatches as the first powerful gusts of wind hit the ship. The structure continued its transformation, becoming something that looked less like a solid object and more like a frozen explosion of geometric shapes, suspended, impossibly above the increasingly violent sea. Elena was the last to go below, taking one final look at the thing that had risen from the depths. As lightning forked from the rapidly darkening sky to the highest point of the structure, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a random encounter, that the oceanic explorer hadn't found this thing by accident. It had found them. And whatever happened next would change not just their lives, but humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. The storm hit with a fury that made the previous night's tempest seem like a gentle shower. The oceanic explorer pitched and rolled violently as waves crashed over its deck. Below, the crew huddled in the mess hall, the largest space available where they could stay together. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows as the main power fluctuated. "It's different this time," Torres said, bracing himself against a table as the ship lurched. "Last night was just a warning. This feels deliberate," Elena finished for him. "Like it's testing our limits." Outside, lightning struck the water around them in continuous, blinding flashes. Thunder shook the ship so forcefully that ceiling panels came loose, showering them with dust and insulation. But despite the storm's intensity, there was something controlled about it, as if the chaos had a pattern that human senses couldn't quite grasp. "The hull integrity is holding," reported Lee, the ship's engineer, after checking the internal monitors. "But I don't know how long our systems can take this electromagnetic interference. Everything's going haywire." Dr. Wu sat in a corner, scribbling frantically in his notebook by the light of a battery-powered lamp. His hands moved almost independently of his conscious mind, filling page after page with calculations and diagrams. "Doctor, you need to strap in," Elena called to him. "This isn't safe." Wu didn't seem to hear her. His eyes had a distant, glassy look, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill in the air. Elena made her way across the pitching floor and grabbed his arm. "Doctor." Wu looked up at her, but his eyes couldn't seem to focus. "Do you hear them?" he whispered. "Hear what?" Elena asked, a new worry creeping into her mind. Was the stress causing him to hallucinate? "The voices," Wu said. They're explaining." Before Elena could respond, a new sound cut through the storm's roar, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It vibrated through the ship's metal frame, through the water around them, through their very bones. The tone held for several seconds, then changed pitch slightly, creating a pattern that repeated 3 times before fading. "What the hell was that?" gasped one of the younger crew members, voicing what everyone was thinking. The ship's communications officer, Raj, who had been trying unsuccessfully to make contact with any other vessels in the area, suddenly yanked off his headphones with a cry of pain. "It's coming through all frequencies," he said, rubbing his ears. "Not just sound, radio waves, everything." The tone sequence repeated, louder this time. Then again, even louder, as if whatever was producing it was growing impatient with their lack of response. "It wants an answer," Wu said, his voice oddly calm now. "It's saying hello." Elena looked at him sharply. How could you possibly know that? Wu's eyes met hers, and for a moment she didn't recognize the person looking back at her. There was something else there, something ancient and vast and utterly inhuman. Because they told me, he said simply. A violent wave hit the ship broadside, sending everyone who wasn't secured tumbling. Equipment crashed to the floor and someone cried out in pain. Elena pulled herself back to her feet, forcing herself to focus on immediate dangers rather than the unsettling change in Wu. Raj, try to match that tone sequence through our external speakers, she ordered. If it wants a response, let's give it one. Are you sure that's wise, Captain? Torres asked quietly. We have no idea what we're saying back. Elena met his gaze steadily. We're already in a dialogue whether we want to be or not. At least this way we're participating consciously. Raj worked quickly, isolating the tone sequence and programming the ship's external communication system to replicate it. When the mysterious call came again, they answered with the same pattern. Silence followed, not just the absence of the tone, but a sudden cessation of the storm itself. The wind died away, the lightning stopped, and the waves, calmed with unnatural speed, leaving the ship bobbing gently in what felt like the eye of a hurricane. It worked, breathed Vega, the photographer. It understood us. Or we just agreed to something we don't understand, muttered Lee darkly. The calm lasted only moments before a new phenomenon began. The hull of the ship started to vibrate with a different kind of sound, not the single tone from before, but a complex harmony that shifted and changed, almost like speech, but without recognizable words. It's talking to us, Wu said, standing now, his notebook forgotten. Really talking. Several crew members reported feeling strange sensations, pressure in their heads, a tingling along their spines, flashes of images that didn't come from their own memories. Elena felt it too, like someone was gently but insistently pressing against the boundaries of her mind. Don't fight it, Wu urged, seeing the discomfort on their faces. They're trying to find a way to communicate that. We can understand. Our language is too limited. They? Elena asked, latching onto the word. There's more than one? Wu nodded absently, his attention clearly divided between the conversation in the mess hall and something only he could perceive. Many, very old. The vibrations intensified, focusing now on specific parts of the ship. The metal walls of the mess hall began to display odd patterns of condensation, forming and reforming in shapes that looked disturbingly like writing. Is anyone recording this? Dr. Wu asked urgently. We need to document everything. Vega raised her personal camera with shaking hands. Battery's nearly dead, but I'll get what I can. As the patterns on the walls grew more complex, crew members began reporting similar experiences, voices or impressions in their minds. Not quite thoughts, but not quite sounds either. Each described it differently, but common themes emerged. Deep time, cycles of awakening and sleeping, watching and waiting. They've been here before, said the ship's medic, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. Many times. They watch us grow. Who are they? Elena demanded, struggling to maintain her grip on the situation. What is that thing out there? Not a thing, Wu said, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that wasn't his own. A vessel, a probe, a fragment of something vaster. The medic nodded, as if this confirmed something she was also hearing. They come from, not space, not as we understand it, somewhere adjacent. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Are you saying it's alien? Yes and no, Wu replied. They were here before us, long before. They watched the first fish crawl onto land. They've been watching ever since. The vibration suddenly focused into a single, overwhelming pulse that drove several people to their knees, hands pressed against their ears, though the sensation wasn't exactly auditory. Images flooded through their minds. Stars seen from impossible angles, landscapes that couldn't exist on Earth, structures that dwarfed cities, beings of light and geometry. And beneath it all, a message, not in words, but in pure concept. We have returned. The cycle nears completion. You must prepare. As suddenly as it had begun, the communication ceased. The strange patterns faded from the walls, and the pressure in their minds eased. Many of the crew sat or lay where they had fallen, gasping and disoriented. Some wept quietly, overwhelmed by the experience. Wu alone remained standing, his face illuminated by a soft inner light that seemed to radiate from his very skin. He turned to Elena with eyes that reflected impossible depths. "They've chosen me," he said quietly, "to translate, to prepare." "Chosen you for what?" Elena asked, her captain's authority reasserting itself through her fear. "What does that thing want from us?" "Not from us," Wu replied. "For us. They've come to warn us. Something is coming, a transformation. They've seen it before, on countless worlds. Some species survive it, some don't." "What kind of transformation?" Torres asked, helping a young scientist who had collapsed during the event. Wu opened his mouth to answer, then suddenly clutched his head and fell to his knees with a cry of pain. Blood trickled from his nose and ears as his body convulsed. "Get the medic!" Elena shouted, rushing to Wu's side. The ship's medic pushed through the crowd, her medical bag already open. "Lay him flat," she ordered. "Someone get me a blanket." Wu's convulsions lasted only seconds before he went completely limp. His breathing was shallow but steady, his pulse rapid. "He's in shock," the medic said after a quick examination. "We need to get him to the infirmary." As they lifted Wu onto an improvised stretcher, his eyes fluttered open briefly. He looked directly at Elena, clarity returning to his gaze for just a moment. "The notebook," he whispered. "Everything's in the notebook." Then his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness again. Elena retrieved Wu's notebook from where it had fallen. Opening it, she found page after page filled with writing and diagrams. Not the neat scientific notation he normally used, but a frantic, driven scrawl that covered every inch of space. Some pages contained complex mathematical equations that she couldn't begin to understand. Others held detailed drawings of molecular structures and astronomical configurations. And some appeared to be written in a language that wasn't human at all, flowing symbols that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "Captain," called the sonar operator from the doorway. "You need to see this." Elena followed him to the sonar room, bringing Wu's notebook with her. On the screen she saw what had alarmed him. The massive structure was moving again, but not toward them or away. It was descending, returning to the depths from which it had emerged. "It's leaving?" she asked, not quite believing it could be that simple. "I think so," the operator replied. "But there's something else. Look at our position." Elena checked the navigation display and felt her stomach drop. According to their instruments, the Oceanic Explorer was now over 200 miles from where they had been when the structure first surfaced. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We couldn't have drifted that far, even in this storm." "It didn't move us, Captain," the operator said, his voice hushed with awe and terror. "It moved the sea itself." The days that followed were strangely quiet. The structure had disappeared beneath the waves, leaving no trace except in the memories of the crew and the few photographs they had managed to capture. The storm had passed, and the sea returned to its normal patterns as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but everything had changed. Dr. Wu remained unconscious in the ship's small infirmary, his condition stable but unresponsive. The ship's medic monitored him constantly, concerned about the continued unusual brain activity she detected even in his unconscious state. "It's like he's dreaming intensely," she explained to Elena during one of their hourly check-ins, "but not like any sleep pattern I've ever seen. His mind is processing something massive." Elena spent hours poring over Wu's notebook, trying to make sense of the frantic writings and diagrams. Some pages contained what looked like star charts, but with configurations that didn't match any known constellations. Others showed molecular structures labeled with symbols that weren't from any scientific notation she recognized. And scattered throughout were passages of text, some in English, some in what appeared to be multiple unknown languages. One passage, written in Wu's normal handwriting, before it devolved into the strange script, stood out. "They have been watching us for millions of years. Not just humans, all life on Earth. They return periodically to check our progress. They've seen countless civilizations on countless worlds rise and fall. They don't interfere directly, but they leave markers, warnings, guides. This is why so many ancient cultures share similar myths about visitors from the sky or sea. They remember. Elena closed the notebook, rubbing her tired eyes. 3 days had passed since their encounter, and she had ordered the ship to return to port at maximum safe speed. The crew moved about their duties like sleepwalkers, their conversations hushed, their eyes haunted by what they had witnessed. Some reported continuing effects, vivid dreams of impossible geometries, sudden insights into problems they'd been struggling with, moments where they understood complex concepts they had never studied. A few described hearing faint echoes of the tones that had vibrated through the ship, especially when they were alone or trying to sleep. The communications systems had come back online shortly after the structure disappeared. But Elena had been hesitant to make contact with the outside world. What could they possibly say? How could they explain what had happened? Finally, on the 4th day, she sent a brief message to the International Oceanic Research Foundation, requesting an emergency medical team to meet them at port for a crew member with an unexplained neurological condition. She made no mention of what they had seen. We should tell them everything, Torres argued when he learned of her decision. The world needs to know what's out there. And say what exactly? Elena countered. That we met a giant alien structure that moved our ship 200 miles and put our lead scientist in a coma after downloading information into his brain. They'd think we all had carbon monoxide poisoning or mass hysteria. We have evidence, Torres insisted. The photos, the readings, Wu's notebook.